So this RC is relatively much shorter than what we have done till now, the last two examples. So let's look at this. By the time the American colonists took up arms against Great Britain, in order to secure their independence, the institution of black slavery was deeply entrenched. Okay, let me first do this. My bad. Read this as usual, pause the video, and then you can also try to answer these three questions according to your understanding. Right? Hope you have done that you've read the passage and you've tried to give answers with these three questions. Now let's try to build a skeleton for this. Right, as I said, that's the step one of our approach, right? Step one is always to read the passage and build the skeleton, right? Initially I said do it on paper for the first few hours. It's okay even if you take a lot of time, but slowly you can start to make a habit of making a mental note of it. So by the time American colonists took up arms, right? So basically American colonists took up arms against Great Britain in order to secure their independence. So that's a freedom fight that happened, right? Americans against Great Britain. The institution of black slavery was deeply entrenched. So what is the meaning of entrenched? It is like, very deeply in the society, are already, what you call it, deeply entrenched is what you see when it has taken its seat for over a really long time, right? So it means here that it has been there in the society in a very deeper level. That is, a lot of people have used the black slavery, and the slavery was at a very high level or something like that. So the institution was deeply entrenched, was deeply rooted. Let me put that. That's the simplest word to say. It's like deeply rooted. By the time the American colonists took up the arms, right? So basically the freedom fight that was happening, right? That's what it's in order to secure their independence. So freedom fight of Americans, right? At that time, the black slavery was already there. A lot of slavery was happening or something like that. Also, I would say, let's say a lot. Right? It happened, when the freedom fight was happening. At the time that freedom fight started, black slavery was already very deeply rooted, or it was there, as a lot of things were around this black slavery was happening. But the contradiction inherent in this situation was, for many, a source of constant embarrassment. So here there's a contradiction according to the author, right? What would be that contradiction? So, I mean, you can guess it, but still, let's continue that. It always appeared. So there's a contradiction. So let's understand what is that contradiction. You can guess actually just based on this two lines, but I'll still go ahead and read. It always appeared a most iniquitous scheme to me. So what does this word mean? It's like unfair. Right? It's basically saying it always seemed very unfair to me. Someone is saying, Abigail Adams, she wrote to her husband saying this, to fight ourselves for what we are daily robbing and plundering. So it's also sort of, taking away, sort of same robbing and all, from those who have as good a right to freedom as we have. So basically the contradiction here, which has been given in the words of this lady Abigail Adams, is that she feels that the freedom fight is an unfair thing because these Americans are fighting themselves, okay? For what? They're fighting basically for freedom, right? So Americans, right, are fighting for freedom, but the fact is that these guys are actually are basically taking away the freedom from this black, right, who have as good a right to freedom as we have. So these same Americans who are fighting for freedom, right, have or had, because it's a past, but let's say had or have taken away freedom from blacks, right? Those that particular thing that this black slavery is happening. So the same Americans, they have taken away the freedom from them. So that's a contradiction that has been highlighted here. These guys are supposedly fighting for freedom from Britain, but the joke or the contradiction here is that the same guys who are so fighting for the freedom are actually taking away freedom for someone else. That's like blacks here in the case of the story. So that's what this first paragraph is saying. So the author is talking about the freedom fight that has happened, but when the freedom fight of America started, right, from against the Great Britain, black slavery was already existing or deeply rooted in the society, and that is what is being mentioned as a contradiction, that it's so unfair that Americans are fighting for their own freedom while they have taken away the freedom from someone else, from the blacks. Many Americans besides Abigail Adams were struck by the inconsistency of their stand during the War of Independence. right? So though even though it's a contradiction, it seems there people have realized, right? Many Americans besides Abigail Adams were struck by the inconsistency of their stand during the War of Independence, and they were not averse to, right? Averse is like afraid, or they were not running away from making moves to emancipate the slaves, that is, free the slaves. So technically it means that a lot of Americans, there are many Americans, they said not some Americans, right? These words would actually give a different perspective. If I say few Americans would mean that maybe only 5-10% of Americans were unhappy with this inconsistency, but rather the passage said many Americans. So that means most of the Americans were actually unhappy by the inconsistency of their, this thing, like fighting for freedom while they are taking away freedom from someone. And they were not averse, so they were not afraid, they were not running away from this fact that they were actually, so many Americans, understood or appreciated the inconsistency, right? And they actually were open to free the slaves, right? They were fighting to free the slaves, right? Emancipate the slaves. Quakers and other religious groups organized anti-slavery societies, while numerous individuals manumitted. Again, this is also like, release them if they're slaves. So it basically means a lot of groups, religious groups and all, and also some individuals, right? Numerous individuals. So that's a lot of individuals sort of were actually freeing the slaves. They were letting their slaves go, or there were bodies which were fighting, for the freedom of the slaves. In fact, within several years of the end of the War of Independence, most of the eastern states had made provisions for the gradual emancipation of slaves. So by the time they got freedom, right? Once they got freedom, they're saying they've indeed worked towards, the most of the eastern states, right, have made provisions. So basically eastern states gave freedom for the blacks. Right. So I'm just a thought popped up in my mind. So I'm using the word blacks in this conversation. So don't take that as any derogatory thing or something. Right. This is just as what the words are reading. I'm just talking that way. So yeah, just to clarify that. So now that's the entire thing, right? What is this passage talking about? The passage basically talks about freedom fight of Americans, right? So while they were doing this, there was a black slavery that was deeply rooted. So that was existing. And that was seen as a contradiction by Americans. That's what it says, the contradiction inherent in the situation. That's at least the contradiction raised by the author, which is also accepted by most of the Americans, right? So Abigail Adams' words were put up here, whoever that lady is. So it always appeared unfair to me that we are fighting, the Americans are fighting for freedom, the same thing which is being taken away by the same people from blacks. Right, so the Americans have understood the inconsistency. A lot of activities have happened. Religious groups, individuals, and all were, open to freeing their slaves and were working on it. And actually, once they got the freedom, even the eastern states, the governments as such, have actually built some provisions and all to make a gradual emancipation of slaves. That's what the summary is. It's much easy to read and understand actually. So let's actually go to these questions. What is the main theme or idea of the passage? Right? What would be the main theme or idea for me? Yes, the thing is the fact that there is an inconsistency, right, in the freedom fight, inconsistency in the the logic, like taking away the freedom part. This is one part I would like to consider to be the main theme of it. Plus, you should also understand that Americans have acknowledged it and they have worked towards it. Right, I would actually want to see both of them being talked about as thing, right? So the thing is, they were fighting for the same freedom which they have taken away from some people. On top of that, they've also acknowledged it and they worked towards coming out of that inconsistency. So they were being a bit fair by releasing people from slavery and all of that. So that's the main theme for me, the combination of these 2 points that I would say. There's an inconsistency, people have acknowledged it and they worked to change it. So that would be my main theme or idea. And why did Americans feel embarrassed during the freedom fight? It's very simple, right? So they were embarrassed because the contradiction was the constant source of, clearly it says the contradiction was the constant source of constant embarrassment. So that is like, it's an unfair thing that they were fighting, right? It's most unfair scheme to me to fight ourselves from what we are daily robbing from those who have as good a right to freedom as we have. So that's fighting for freedom when you are taking away from someone. Fighting for freedom when you're robbing it from others. Right? And what changes were observed in America post their independence? So that's given here, right? In fact, within several years of the end of War of Independence, most of the eastern states had made provisions for the gradual emancipation of slaves. So the government bodies, like most of the eastern states of America, so that's like the government bodies have themselves made provisions, to emancipate slaves or free slaves, etc. So that's the only change that I have in terms of post independence that's been talked in the passage. I cannot talk about anything else because the passage does not have any clue for that, right? So these are the broader answers that you should have a sense of based on reading the passage.